Hi there. I'm not going to take up too much time introducing EACOM because I'm a panelist. But for those of you who don't know the company, we are a large Eastern Canadian wood products company, predominantly in the lumber business. And you'll hear more from me in a little bit, so I'm not going to take up any more time. I'm happy with that. Thanks.
We like sponsors like that. Check came on time, recruited more people to come. I love it. In any event, so I'm going to introduce our three panelists. Look, they're actually well behaved and sitting in the right order. So on my far right is, I didn't practice pronouncing your name, Kevin. If I get it wrong, just throw something at me. Kevin Eshkawkogan? Close? Not even close. Kevin, what's your last name for me?
Eshkawkogan.
Eshkawkogan. Now see, why didn't I catch that the first time? I'll practice. Yeah, I should have asked. I forgot. Shoot me. Okay, just so you know, that exchange is actually particularly relevant because tomorrow he's going to get added to my board, and so for the next 3 years I'm going to hear about how I mispronounced his name for the first time. Anyway, such is life. Kevin has been a player in the development of Indigenous cultural tourism in Ontario since 2003, integral part of the development and growth of the Great Spirit Circle Trail on Manitoulin Island, one of the country's most renowned Indigenous tourism organizations that provides culturally authentic Indigenous experiences to visitors along with marketing support to Indigenous operators. Works tirelessly to unite Indigenous tourism providers, grow market reach, and bring meaningful employment opportunities to the region. Kevin is a mentor and visionary who works closely with his community to ensure sustainable and organic growth within the Indigenous tourism industry. Those are wonderful words that come out of his bio, but I think you learn more about Kevin from the fact that he asked for the standing ovation for the three young people on our panel earlier. I had a chance to see him in action at a conference in Cochrane, and I've been impressed, and so I'm happy to see him join us here today. Next to him is Trevor Walker, as President and CEO of Frontier Lithium. Hopefully one of those companies is going to take advantage of some of those changes that Peter just told us about. Trevor joined Frontier Lithium in 2010, and since then has played a key strategic role in focusing the company on its lithium deposit in northwestern Ontario, PAC Lithium Deposit. Prior to joining the company, Trevor was vice president of the Consbec Group of Companies, where he accumulated 10 years of experience in mining and construction industry. During his tenure at Consbec, he worked closely with companies such as Gold Corp, Rio Tinto, West Dome, Barrick, Noranda, Agrium, and Uniman, as well as other major companies. He's got an honors BA from the University of Western Ontario and an MBA from Webster University, Geneva, Switzerland. He's laughing, so I think I got something wrong in that sentence too. But anyway, Christine, of course, holds a Master of Forest Conservation from the University of Toronto's Faculty of Forestry, has held policy positions in the Office of the Ontario Minister of Natural Resources and the Ontario Forest Industry Association. Since 2015, she's worked as the Director of Public Affairs with EACOM Timber Corp and is a recipient of the Prince of Wales Award for Sustainable Forestry and the Ontario Professional Foresters Association Furneaux Awards. Am I allowed to ask how long that's been in your bio? Okay. The reason I ask is because every time I look at my bio, I'm like, my God, is that still in there? But anyway, at this point, I'm going to turn the podium over to these esteemed folks who are going to share with you perspectives on industry opportunities leading into the future for Ontario's northern regions. I guess, Kevin, you're first.
Ani Bojo, Gigido Nene Dijnikaz, Nidodasing Donjaba, Ginoje Dodem. So with that, I'm really glad to see Chief Sears. He's actually a legend in the area. He doesn't know me very well personally, but he's been in the political world for quite some time. And I'm really glad to be in his territory because every time I come here, I learn something new or I get reminded of something. And I'm glad he got a chance to speak today. Thanks to the elder, Miigwech. As usual, wise words from our elders. We have to listen to the older ones. I'm not on youth councils anymore, so I can say that. And maybe someone will start to listen to me, although our youth council was phenomenal, I must say that. The future's looking pretty good. With that being said, I just wanted to share something about MPI. I think MPI is doing a fantastic job here of including Indigenous content and Indigenous people in a meaningful way in everything that they're doing. And just to share that with you, and when you talk about this presentation that I'm going to get into here, and as I wrap up, One of the things the messages that I give, very much along the lines of what you've heard today, we want to be good neighbors with everybody, and we got to understand each other if we really want to prosper together and move forward in a meaningful way. So before we came up, actually this was given me, for those of you who can't see, it's a tobacco pouch, and it was there to ask me to do this. And that's a part of my culture. So somebody took the time to learn about who I am as an individual, to approach me in a good way, to share my knowledge. And my knowledge, as far, and in this case, I may not be viewed as a leader in ceremony per se, but the way I've been brought up within my culture is it's our responsibility to share if we carry knowledge and somebody approaches you in a good way and needs that information. And that's what's happening here today. So I'm going to get into that information now. And we're going to, I'm going to highlight a few things that I picked up. I really try to come into these meetings early so I can catch the whole day and catch the vibe of the whole event. And I just wanted to point out, I didn't put my hand up as a Boomerang resident, only because I'm not quite sure if I'm a Boomerang resident, especially not this same reason, because I've never lived here. But I have lived on Manitoulin Island, moved to Chapleau for forestry work, went to school in Lakehead up in Thunder Bay, went to school in North Bay at Canadore, moved down to Toronto, and then in a roundabout way, boomeranged back to Manitoulin. So I don't know if I'm a boomerang or if somebody's just throwing me around like a rock. So I'm not quite sure. One thing I did want to point out, I talked a little bit earlier that we doubled our Indigenous participation in the NPI event that I was at last time to this time, which is fantastic. I did pick up a rough stat from the last event I was at, and I'm not sure if everyone knows this, but about a third of the population and NPI staff, please correct me if I'm wrong, but about a third of the population in Northern Ontario is actually Indigenous. And with 8 people at an event like this, we need to raise that up, and we need to do it collectively. It's not just the Indigenous people's responsibility to come. We have to reach out to each other and invite people in, because we need to all be a part of this together. There should be roughly about a third of the group here as Indigenous people. Just moving on here. The other thing I wanted to point out, I'm going to tell you who we are and what we do and why we do it. So I've been doing Indigenous tourism for quite some time, sometimes doing it by myself. And actually at this very point in time, although I've got some new resources to grow Indigenous tourism in Ontario, I'm still doing it by myself, actually right now today in Ontario here as a collective. So, one staff dedicated to French immigration, Francophone immigration. I can relate. We've got one staff working on Indigenous tourism in all of Ontario, and we're by far, as you'll see shortly, the largest Indigenous tourism economy in Canada, if not the world. So I brought these out. There's some pictures here, and I want to point some of them out. So there's a couple of things here, and it's why we do what we do. So you heard my story about being a rock or maybe a boomerang. I'll call myself a boomerang, just it sounds a bit better. But you'll see some people in here, and it's about telling our story on our terms. And it's really, really important. Although we listen to market demands, and in some regions of the world, particularly France is one of those countries, 2 out of 3 international visitors from France want to experience an Indigenous tourism activity and experience. And we need to be aware of that. We need to meet the market demands. However, we need to tell our stories on our terms. And one of the pictures you'll see there is a fellow sitting in a boat. He's from Eshkawkogan Tourism, and there's some Eshkawkogan individuals here today. He does a very good job of telling his story from his community on his terms within his community. Eshkawkogan is very progressive. That's actually their tagline, proud and progressive, right? And just so you know, my father's from Eshkawkogan, my stepfather's from Chiging First Nation, my mother's from Untitled First Nation, and I just say I'm from everywhere around Manitoulin. I'm from Leduc, that's where I say it. Spirit Island, this is Manitoulin Island. Some other pictures in there we've been taking very seriously in the industry because markets are demanding it. So you see there's a picture of me speaking. I'm at a podium. That's at World Tourism Day down in Toronto. That was last fall. Down at the bottom is one of the reasons I stay on Manitoulin Island. And I know we talked about our challenges earlier about keeping people in the north, leaving, coming back. I'm one of those people who have come back to the north. And that's actually a picture on Little Current, about 2 minutes from my home. It's a community space. That's my daughter doing some yoga down there. It's one of the reasons we stay on the Great Lakes. It's truly spiritual, and it's really one of these amazing places. Believe it or not, I used to be pretty athletic. I actually used to be I would say a pretty decent grass dancer. So that's a picture of me in my grass dancer regalia. So I do have connections to it. I've actually stopped dancing only because I've got a medical issue with my left side, where this left side is a little bit delayed. I'm not the all-star hockey player I used to be, at least in my head, and I still challenge to skate. And then that last picture, that black and white one, I just want to point that out to you because this is a big reason why we do what we do. And I'm just going to give you guys about 3 seconds in popcorn style fashion, yell the answer to this question. What's missing from that picture, the black and white one? Kids. A little bit unfair advantage. She's from Eshkawkogan. Thanks, Colleen. That picture is taken in with Eshkawkogan. Down by, you can see the Eshkawkogan church in the background there. And what kids are missing from that, because this picture is taken right after they were taken away to go to residential school, and you'll see just adults in there. So one of the reasons, my own personal story, we had to move away from our home community of, at the time it was Chiging, between Chiging, Ondekom, with my stepfather and my mother, and we moved up to Chapleau. And when I got the opportunity to go back to Manitoulin, I really enjoyed doing the work because I was able to create opportunity for others so they didn't have to leave their home, not as moving as, say, the residential school, that we have to deal with, the things that go along with that, but it's still traumatizing in its own way. We had to sacrifice a lot to simply enough provide for ourselves, and we moved around Northern Ontario to make that happen. So I want to touch on some things. I'm going to zip through some of these things pretty quick because I think we know them, and I'll just share some stories. One of the ones I want to put out here is on the second one. There's a big cliche we use in our industry, rising tides raise all boats. It's a pretty common cliche we use for a lot of different things. What I tell people nationally, because there aren't a lot of organizations like Indigenous Tourism Ontario across the country. There's actually only 4 that are established right now out of the 13 provinces and territories. So what I tell people in the tourism industry is this: if you want to raise the tides, that's great, but guess what? Indigenous people are going to drown because in a lot of cases we don't have the boats or the vehicles to participate in the economy in the way that we should. And we need to build those things first before we can get involved. And that's so important, especially in our tourism industry. We tell them, listen, we don't have a voice. We don't have that vehicle for a voice, but we're marketing activities and spending all these dollars in different places, but we're getting ahead of ourselves in a lot of cases. What's going on here? Thomas, I think there's something wrong with the PowerPoint. So I just want to point out some things here. Here's the leaders nationally in terms of our industry, in terms of the key performance indicators that we utilize to gauge ourselves. And these are set out by the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada. That's a board of directors, and it's an organization that's nationwide. Ontario was very key in getting that established. I was involved in that. I'm actually the last remaining founding board member on that board. I'm their vice chair at this point, but I'm looking to move on because I'm not on the youth councils anymore. I've got to pass that torch on. So some of the leaders in this is Indigenous Tourism British Columbia, for example. To operate annually, they get just over $2 million to operate annually on a provincial scale to help their industry grow. Indigenous Tourism Ontario, by far, we have the most number of Indigenous tourism businesses in Canada, like by far. And I'm going to show you a scorecard here in a second that's going to demonstrate that. Quebec Aboriginal Tourism, over 300 members. So Quebec, BC, and Ontario, no surprise, leading the industry in Canada. It's pretty common for a lot of industries, right? Now, where does Ontario stand and where does Northern Ontario stand? So out of the support element, that alone, we are 10th out of 13. So there's other provinces that are getting much more support than we are in Ontario. This is the national issue. And then, of course, it trickles down to the Northern Ontario, Southern Ontario split, okay? Ontario is first with the largest number of businesses, again, by far. About 50% of those are in Northern Ontario, give or take, okay? And then the potential increase to the GDP, just for Northern Ontario, if we were to implement our strategy correctly, and a part of it is cut off, Thomas is right, there's some things wrong with the PowerPoint when we sent it, I can totally relate. But our potential here to grow the GDP in Northern Ontario is about $200 million. And if we engage and implement the strategy the way we see fit. So this is the one thing that I wanted to show to you. You take a quick look at this. Just look at how large Ontario is compared to the rest of the provinces, and this is specific to Indigenous tourism, the Indigenous tourism industry. We dwarf everybody. We dwarf everybody, yet we're, getting the support of, a number 10 province. It really doesn't make any sense. And the main job I seem to have been doing the last 18 months was trying to close that disparity gap between us and many, many others. So you can see that we're larger than all of the Maritimes. We're larger than all of the territories combined. We're larger than all of the Western provinces, less BC combined. We're huge, yet we're not adequately engaged in the industry, and there's a lot of tokenism that still goes on, and we need to correct that collectively. So being mindful of time, I'm going to move on here a little bit. I'm just going to get 3 things up here. So we want to tell our story in our terms. And there's another picture of that fellow Luke that's there. And here's some key points and I mentioned it earlier, international markets are demanding Indigenous tourism product. And that's true for Ontario as well. So I mentioned France, Germany, 1 in 3 visitors want to experience Indigenous tourism experiences. Indigenous tourism experiences cannot meet the demand right now. There's a huge opportunity here. And what I want to point out is it's not just about Indigenous people benefiting from Indigenous tourism. And at our table, we talked about it a little bit, but we really didn't get into it because we didn't have the time and we're just flying. Like we were on question 3, we're still talking about question 1. So with that being said, the Indigenous tourism industry, it really does buy into that concept of raising the tide for all boats. We can't do it alone. We can't grow Indigenous tourism alone. We need to partner with other groups, hotels, restaurants, transportation services, so on and so forth. And we have to do it on our terms, obviously, so that many, many times. But the other key thing about all of this is we are not just cultural tourism. We often get pigeonholed that we're the guys who are going to stand there in our regalia, greet people, dance, and then walk away, and that's it. We have a story to tell, and we need to tell that story on our terms. And if that story is different than what the markets are demanding, the markets need to start to get educated on what we are about as human beings and as people. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do. And there's some things that are one of the new sort of niche sectors within our industry that's growing is food tourism. And that's going to be a huge one that's going to tell our story in our terms in a much more modern way. So to leave you with a couple of things, I've got 3 slides for my panelists. I know they got their time, they got to go through too. I say this everywhere I go. If you want to help contribute to growing Indigenous tourism, you want to be involved in Indigenous tourism, you don't have to necessarily be Indigenous. You can be a supporter. But to start, you simply enough need to be a good neighbor. And I think the youth panel today, they talked about a few of these things. You need to understand where other people are coming from, whether they're Indigenous, Francophone, Anglophone, whomever, if you're going to want to have to work together. And I know at our table earlier on, we talked about those old alliances and collaborations. Those need to be revitalized in whatever way it is. I totally understand they're much more complex these days. I haven't put in the political time that Chief Sayers has, but I have done some time on my chiefing council back home in Chiging. And I did 3 terms there, and that was enough for me at the time. But the bottom line is we got to reach out to each other. We got to work with each other. And if you don't have Indigenous friends, there's at least, I think I counted 8, if not more, Indigenous people in this room. You now have 8 new Indigenous friends as far as I'm concerned. You have at least 1 right here. And I'm a cheap friend. You don't even have to call me or anything. Just say hi once in a while. Even a wave is good enough. The key thing when you're going out and trying to develop things, though, is make sure you're genuine. And I think we talked about it, so I'm not going to reiterate it, but you got to be true to yourself, and you got to go out there and you got to get with people, get connected to people, talk to people, partner with people. And the main message I want to leave with you guys, I'm not going to do the shameless plugs to join ITO and ITech, but I just did, is you want to ask Indigenous people who you already know to introduce you to somebody else. If you don't know Chief Sayers, go and introduce yourself. Okay? He's one of our leaders, not just here in his community, but around the province. And I was, joking and teasing a little bit that he's a legend. He really is. He's a well-known chief. And we have him here in our backyard. I'm not just pumping his tires, but it's the reality of the situation. Charles has a reputation as well, and, we pump that up as well. But the point is, reach out and talk to people. Now, the last thing I want to talk about on these slides is it's simply enough. If you're going to say you're going to help and you want to engage Indigenous people, simply enough, do it. Don't say you're going to help and then we never hear from you until you need us to introduce you to somebody else for a project you're working on for your benefit. Okay? It's not going to work that way. We can work together to grow the industry and the economy collectively so we all benefit. But we have to start our conversations. Don't just come and see Indigenous people when you need permission to get access to natural resources or you have a project that you want to support. Don't come to us with a plan. Come to us before the plan is established and say, hey, let's get to know each other and maybe we can work on something down the road. And those plans will come and they'll be much more meaningful and they're going to work out in your benefit, their benefit, and the benefit of the communal good. And with that being said, we want to, when we look at this and we work together, let's think of this as we're working on things to grow Northern Ontario. We want to develop policies that are going to grow Northern Ontario. We're not just working on Indigenous policies or Francophone policies or Anglophone policies. We got to change our thinking because we've got to evolve. We're human beings. That's in our DNA to do that. So with that, I'll say miigwech and I'll pass the mic off to one of my friends here. Miigwech.
Good afternoon, everyone. First off, just want to say thank you for this opportunity to take some of your time to tell you basically my story and the story of Frontier Lithium. I don't have a lot of time. We're going to hit it at a very high level, but given today, I know everyone in this room can read between the lines. I'll tell you, I'm born and raised in the valley, and not in Ottawa. It's the small valley just north of Sudbury. I very fortunate to grow up in a very entrepreneurial family. Worked in a family business. Firstly in the Sudbury Basin and all across the country. I've been so fortunate to been able to travel and get educated at home and abroad. And I'm really happy that over the years I've come back to live in the valley and work hard for myself, my family, my community, my northern province, my province. And I'll tell you, listening to everyone speak today, as an entrepreneur, my mind, my heart, my soul's been twisted. My blood pressure's gone up and down about 15 times today. And my job as a leader in a small company is really first and foremost to listen. And one thing that I'm really good at is combining different ideas and thoughts together to try and find the right path. What I can say is in our culture, in our business, no matter what we do, it is really about us and our community, us together as Northerners. And that is ingrained in our DNA. So I'll explain a little bit, and I'll try and come back full circle with this presentation today. Frontier Lithium, firstly, Frontier Lithium is a public company traded on the TSX Venture. So we are regulated, and I first and foremost wanted to tell you that my job is to think about the future and talk about the future, try to predict the future, and make decisions based on that. So as a publicly traded company, be forewarned of my forward-looking statements. Quick outline, I want to briefly go through a few slides just to kind of change gears, just get everyone's mind in the right place, and then dive into the details of specifically what we're doing. basic outline, start at Industrial Revolution, basically, seeking using a source of energy to begin the movement in a more efficient manner of people, goods, etc. Bleeding into, quickly the transportation revolution of taking it from more of a public into more privates, into the individual and those freedoms and the impact that's had on society and GDP. And out of the previous presentation, I think I'll be under line number 11 on, what are we doing and what can we do as a result of change? Because in change, and in movement, there's opportunity. And that's one thing that I personally think of 24/7. We have a huge opportunity for Northern Ontario. Massive, massive opportunity. It's referred to on this slide deck here as a revolution. I think of it more of an evolution. Things take time, and we're getting prepared for that. And I'll shed some of the strategies and principles and belief system help guiding us as we try to prepare for positioning our communities of the North to participate in this opportunity on energy storage and applying that technology to, again, a new way of movement of people and goods in obviously a much greener fashion for the world. And that is the beauty in this transition and change. Okay. Oh, we got some pop-ups here. So basic coal, we've discussed here previously about China and the burning of coal, a source of energy. First applied obviously to the locomotive that had two inputs, had a massive output on GDP for the world. And the whole point here is let's talk about these transition moments, and that's where the opportunities lie. We have to be prepared, and we have to move and be diligent and smart about it. Transition, into the Rockefeller days, and first with kerosene and into oil, and basically the building of distribution and supply chains. Of course, then to support firstly the Model T in a big way. The distribution, the energy source was there, organized, deployed. Then manufacturing could take advantage of that. Obviously, massive change for the world, and all lead to basically the human potential of doing more and increased growth for the world. We have been addressed here earlier on the change towards a cleaner energy source, and we've heard about, from a pure economic standpoint, the advantage that wind has, in particular, when located properly with at least 7 meters per second, of the benefits of that. And that's very real, and everyone is feeling that change happen. It's taking time, and I think that's appropriate. This change does not happen overnight. Technology is changing, etc. This, of course, is now leading into energy storage and electric vehicles, the whole point of why I'm here. This is a massive business, a massive opportunity, and it's happening. We think at Frontier, this is one of the best things we can do in reference to previous presentation to clean up the world and hit reset on making sure that our kids, our grandkids, have a better future. And that's really what's all this about. A little bit on the history. Panasonic, Sony, with regards to energy storage and lithium-ion cells, in the 90s developed the first small lithium-ion batteries. That, of course, firstly went into portable electronics. Small batteries, that's a great place to start. Small batteries started with obviously the advent of Apple's movements into computers that can last for days now on a charge. And we've gone through this transition with technology, and remember, behind it, the technology behind the battery is getting better and better. The world is learning. Now, what is the next step for this? During this change is obviously as the technology has improved, the capacities have increased, the energy densities have increased, the amount of cycle opportunities with these batteries have also increased. And now we've come to a place where, from a pure economic perspective, it makes sense to put it into a vehicle. And although we haven't seen a lot of EVs in Northern Ontario, that's a very quickly growing market. Firstly, the catalyst being driven out of China. And basically all arrows in the world of lithium-ion batteries point to China right now. And, as per previous presentation, the main driver for that was, and I remember, watching the Beijing Olympics as a kid, and I always remembered, the commentators talking about how the plants were shut down for the Olympics, just to clean up the city during that celebration. That was the beginning of the Chinese realizing and investing heavily into lithium-ion technology and basically trying to clean up the cities. That was the easiest way to get things started, and China remains to be heavily subsidized, and they're working very diligently, very hard at not only increasing their own market, but try and control lithium-ion around the world. That's really what they're up to. Okay, I really got to get to the point here. An example, what's happening? We were a little bit insulated in the north. By 2025, there'll be about 300 different models of EVs. The market is growing very quickly. What's behind it is we're coming very close to that point. So I've talked about China with subsidization, so stimulated growth. The EU is following a very similar practice with regards to even penalties on CO2 emissions. Dieselgate was really important because that's where governments said, hey, that's not right. And Volkswagen has paid a massive penalty. Volkswagen is a leading company behind next generation electric vehicles. So change is happening right now. So some of the corporations, the key is to support corporations. We have good entrepreneurial people with the right culture involved. Volkswagen got slapped on the wrist, and they're really making an effort in investing and making change. They should be rewarded for that. So us as individuals have decisions to make, and that's the beauty in this transition, to support those that we believe are making the right decisions for the good of the world and for down to individuals. North America is a different place, and North America's key driver is cost. So we feel that very soon, based on the technology, a lot of smart analysts think that 2022 to 2025 will see price parity between internal combustion engines and electric vehicles. It's at that point that consumers making decisions will start to buy and consider electric vehicles. The growth in front of North America is big, and we're not just talking about the cost of ownership of, yes, it only costs me $5 a week to charge that vehicle. We're talking about costs up front cash outlay to make purchases for a tool that can work for you, whether you're driving 20 kilometers a day or 200 kilometers a day. The technology is there, and the costs, because the scaling is happening around the world, the costs are coming in line with price parity with internal combustion. So that's what we see happening. So let's talk a little bit about what we're doing here in Northern Ontario. Before I get to that, as a result of that, I made mention of all arrows pointing to China. One important thing that's happening in the space for resources and the critical materials required to build electric vehicles is a trend from globalization to nationalization and thinking about supply chains in a more regional, local context. It's happening right now. Washington is working on their Critical Minerals Act. Canada is following suit with that. We are seeing recent transactions with some large corporations, such as Apple investing $250 million last week into Corning to bring manufacturing of Gorilla Glass and the best glass in the world back into North America. These things are happening right now. And at the end of the day, this is what consumers want, and it's also what the world needs. Does it make a lot of sense to take lithium from Chile, send it to China, process it there, take that active material, send it to Japan or South Korea, go back, get turned into a car, get shipped all the way over into North America? That's insanity. And we got to get this fixed. And this is our opportunity during transition to get this fixed. So the trend is there to look locally, work locally. And that is in our DNA at Frontier Lithium and what we're spending a lot of our time trying to make sure that we're aligned with that because we're Northerners. I grew up for generations listening to, back to that slide earlier today of, dig it and ship it. This is our opportunity. So up there is a map, and obviously it shows the Great Lakes region. We have a huge opportunity. We have a huge market, in the Great Lakes region, specifically in the U.S. Michigan and Ontario are from an auto, original equipment manufacturer, OEM perspective, they are the manufacturing hubs for vehicles. We've got to keep that. Ontario in particular, in the last 10 years, 20% reduction in manufacturing in Ontario, lost down to the Carolinas and to Mexico. So I can tell you with confidence that our leaders in the current provincial government are really concerned. And we in particular are working close with our leaders right now on how do we change that? How do we take advantage of this shift in the market? Number one, you got to work with what you got. And that's a great starting point. What do we have? One of the things we have in the north is high quality resources. So not only are we close to the market, but we have great resources. Our vision is to work closely. So let's hit pause for a second. So what is a battery? Battery is lithium, nickel, cobalt. Those are the big value drivers behind a battery. We know all of those names very well in Northern Ontario. Those elements are, we have the highest quality nickel, cobalt, And what we're working on at Frontier is the highest quality lithium resource in North America. We, by size, would have the second largest in North America. It's a high quality asset. So our job is, how do we use that? So we're working very close and having a lot of conversations with the nickel side and cobalt side of the business with the provincial government on, how can we, rather than just mine it and ship it, how can we get that added value for the North? And what we're working on is to obviously take a phased approach. We're not in a rush. Things got to be done right. This is going to take time. But what we have done is constructed our company to make sure that our company's decision makers are Northerners. And I can tell you all, we've pushed 2 multinational groups away, 4 Chinese groups away. We are entrepreneurs and our heart is in the North. So we have to work together to try and do this during this opportunity. So that's a little bit about, Frontier, our strategy, what we're doing. And what it is about is making sure that we can develop resources for the benefit of all of us together and capture the downstream manufacturing. Because if we can do that, we need to leverage what we have. And what we have is high quality resources. That's a good starting point. What we don't have is the capacity to build those midstream manufacturing, from the chemicals to the active materials that you need on a battery for both the electrodes, the anode and the cathode, and then into the cell production, and then down. That will come. The benefit we have is we have resources in the North and the OEMs, auto manufacturers in the South. So if we work together, but we start and support the top, now we have leverage over everything in the middle. And that's one of the things and strategies that we're up to and working very close with everyone in the North, including our current leaders in the province. They do care and they're very concerned. So that, in essence, is a little bit about Frontier. And what we're trying to do is spearhead the ecosystem so that we can go everything from mine to manufacturing in Ontario. And that's what we're working on. And the advantage we have is being in the Great Lakes region, plentiful with great people, resilient people, diverse people, problem solvers, resources, and access to market. What a huge opportunity for us Northerners. And that's what Frontier is working on. It's going to take time, but because the market's there, because we take a phased approach, we will never get controlled by the large corporations. We have to survive and move forward. Our goal is to preserve growth of output where we could take the OEMs from the South and work backwards and build the capacity creeping back into the North, because that's the leverage we have. And we can do it. It might take us 2 generations, but we think there's a very good run and opportunity behind what's happening with EVs and transportation. Thank you.
My colleagues have done a good job of keeping their number of slides short. I'm starting to understand why the team at MPI was concerned when I sent them a 25-slide deck. So I have my timer up here to keep me on track, and we're going to go through all 24 together. So actually, for a forestry company, I'm here to talk to you about Toronto. So let's get started. I shared with you EACOM is a lumber producer. Now you've got a map. You can see where our operations are, 9 manufacturing facilities, but the big footprint is in Ontario with the 6 assets. We've grown a lot in the last couple of years, and some noteworthy investments include the rebuild of the Timmins mill, the restart of the Ear Falls sawmill after 5-year closure, and in 2017, we made an acquisition of the engineered wood mill here in Sault Ste. Marie. So adding the engineered wood product, the I-joist, to our product offering has been very good to diversify in that respect. EACOM is part of a large and diverse forest product sector with all kinds of operations across the province. And our sector has opportunities. We're strategically located next to the world's largest economy, the US, and we're also well located to Canada's largest market, which is the Greater Toronto Area. So we've got lots of opportunities, lots of challenges, share challenges with other sectors, labor, transportation, obviously markets. In 2018, we had record pricing, but in 2019, the market situation is different. And of course, the softwood lumber trade war. I'm not going to dwell on here, but just a quick slide. We've been paying a duty since April of 2017, and this is the 5th time that Canada and the US will argue over softwood lumber. Canada is fighting back, but it's a long litigation process, and with federal election and American election, we'll continue this process for the next couple of years, and we will be subject to a 20% duty until a resolution is achieved. And so let's talk about those markets. Here is a picture of EACOM's market. About 60% of our products goes to the US, and then 40% stays in Canada. And this is really true of Ontario's forest products sector. 95% of Ontario's forest products exports go to the US, and so for EACOM, that's our export market. I'm not going to dwell too much on the American market. 1.28 million housing starts in 2018, and nobody builds with softwood lumber the way that North Americans do. It's not a market we can ignore, so even with the duty, we continue to push most of our products to the US. But actually, the rest of my presentation is going to focus on the Canadian market, and as you can see, much of our Canadian product goes to the GTA. So you will actually see our green lumber wrap on all kinds of trucks and rail in Northern Ontario. And if you're driving to Toronto on Highway 11 and Highway 400, you will see our product making its way to Toronto. And before we get into this, this is not anything that's shocking to you, and we've talked about this a lot so far today. We've got an interesting context in Ontario. It's the most populated province, but everybody lives in Toronto. Someone else already mentioned the 780,000 people that live in Northern Ontario, and it is shrinking. I don't want to date myself, but when I was a student, we were still at 1 million. We've got a very diverse and large Aboriginal population with the 133 First Nation, which is a big difference from the number of First Nation we have in Quebec. We're talking about 11 First Nation community versus the 133. So an interesting context in Ontario. Much of the province is Crown land, and we have many resource-dependent northern communities. So what have been the opportunities to use wood in our Toronto area? It's actually been a lot of changes recently. Lumber has typically been restricted to single-family houses. We frame our houses with 2x4s, whereas the city skylines have usually been dominated by steel and concrete. But the world is changing, and in 2015, Ontario welcomed or unveiled a new building code which allow us to build higher with wood. We went from 4-story wood to 6-story wood. So that was an exciting step. We've seen some more recent investments in Ontario in mass timber construction, looking at innovation and development of new products that would help inform continued upgrades to the building code. And just a few months ago, Ontario announced an investment in the first ever cross-laminated timber facility in Ontario, so a mass timber facility in St. Thomas. And actually, we're going to take a moment now, and I'm going to talk to you about mass timber. How many of you have heard of these terms? Mass timber, cross-laminated systems. Okay, so okay. Well, for those of you who haven't heard, EACOM produces lumber. So we're talking about 2x4s that you're either using to frame your single-family homes or studs that you'd use in renovation. Mass timber products are these cool engineered wood products of the future. Engineered wood where you're taking lumber and you're gluing them together perpendicular or parallel to form these panels, beams, columns. These are the kinds of products that we're using into wooden skyscrapers. You heard me, wooden skyscrapers. Just to show you what it looks like a little bit more. So I actually had a lot of fun with this slide. These are all headlines from 2019. The world is changing, and traditionally, what has limited wood from entering into these other markets have been the regulation. You're not going to use a 2x4 into these tall wood structures, but following extensive research in Canada and around the world, the data shows that these mass timber systems are just as structurally strong and safe as the alternative, steel and concrete. And so the building industry is getting very excited about the potential to use these kinds of products. They can be more affordable, and they're also green. I don't need to go into too many details. I think we've had some conversations about the importance of carbon, but you may not know this. 50% of the dry weight of wood is carbon. And when you are capturing that carbon in a tree before it burns or it decays, that product is stored in the life of the product. And then when you replace those trees by growing new trees, you're having a positive impact on the carbon cycle. So timber is making a comeback, and it's coming to Toronto. But before we talk about what's going on in Toronto, I wanted to share a little bit about what's been going on in other jurisdictions. I shared with you that Ontario unveiled a building code that allowed 6-story wood back in 2015. BC actually did this back in 2009. So Ontario is catching up. And this is important because the GTA is the largest housing market in the country. So let me introduce you to Brock Commons in Vancouver. This is Canada's tallest wood building at 18 stories. It is a 404 student residence, and I've got some lovely photos from the inside so you can get a sense of how beautiful building with wood can be, the warmth and the humanity that comes from being surrounded by this material. So tall wood is coming to Toronto. Back in May of this year, NRCan announced an investment in the Arbor. And I should have mentioned, Brock Commons was also an NRCan tall wood demonstration project. And those are the kinds of projects that help inform the updates to the codes. So the Arbor is going to be a 10-story wood building right at Toronto waterfront for residents. And they're even going to have a childcare facility in the building to meet the demands of the local growing neighborhood. And during construction, and once completed, this is going to be a living laboratory for students and researchers on these climate-friendly buildings. Another photo to show you what it'll look like by the waterfront. And there's more. University of Toronto is also excited about their plans for a 14-story building, and this one we're talking about is at Bloor Street. There's other projects you may have heard of, Sidewalk Labs, and there we're not talking about a tall wood building. We're talking about mass timber districts going up to 35-story wood. So this is getting really exciting. The plans for this U of T building were submitted to the City of Toronto in April of this year, so stay tuned for more. And so what's next? So as I've mentioned, Brock Commons being a demonstration project, these are the kinds of things that have fed into building code reviews. So we expect the next iteration of the National Building Code to be released in December of 2020, and it will open up the door for 12-story wood. Once the building code is issued, jurisdictions and provinces can incorporate those into their own building codes. So it's very exciting to think about going from 6-story wood to 12-story wood, and what that might do for our cities. Brock Commons is a really great example because it was designed by a Canadian architecture firm using Canadian wood in a Canadian city. That's where we're heading with some of this. Again, just to show you some photos, it's not just about the buildings themselves, but the structures that you see on the street, wood in our restaurants, in our homes, as well as in our infrastructure like bridge. When people start to see wood, when they want to live in wood, when they want to heal in wood, when they want to play in wood, when they want to learn in wood, then we're going to start to have a bit of a connection between the urban dwellers and where the wood is coming from the northern forest. On August 15th, I was fortunate enough to take a rock star group of architects, engineers. We had folks from Ellis Don, folks from the Carpenters Union up to Timmins so that they could see firsthand how forests are managed, and they could visit the sawmills to get a sense of the supply chain. And we even had one of the principal from Morima and Tashima Architects, and they're the firms that were involved in the arbor. And I can tell you that it's interesting when foresters come together with this building industry, because these are engineers and architects who discovered wood and the versatility and the advantages of building with wood. They don't come from the northern forest, so they fell in love with using wood before they really understood where it came from. And they're very interested in making sure that the wood comes from a sustainably managed forest, and that they're contributing to prosperity in northern communities when they're making those choices. We're getting a lot of interest and a lot of demands. In November, we'll be at the Toronto Society of Architecture, and we're just getting started because there's a lot of momentum around this. And so I'm really convinced the future is going to be built with wood, and just want to make sure that it's Canadian wood. That's it, 24 slides. Thank you.
Okay, everybody knows the routine, right? Anybody have a question, you put up their hand and Anthony will bring you the microphone.
Hi, Sean Halliday, Associate Marie Local Immigration Partnership. Christy, my question was for you with the housing. That's really fascinating. I was wondering what engagement, if any, had been done with the municipalities in terms of their interest in the north for building more affordable housing for their ageing populations or ballooning international student populations, for example.
So actually, housing is... Can you guys hear me? I don't need the mic. Housing is such an important issue that it's a federal election issue. And we're seeing planners in areas like the GTA look to build up, moving away from single-family homes. So there's a huge advantage here, particularly if wood is more affordable and has all of these other benefits. When it comes to northern communities, we're really seeing them champion it. We have a beautiful cross-laminated timber library in the city of Timmins, and the Sudbury has the MacEwan School of Architecture, which is also promoting the use of wood. And so that has been great engagement. When we went up to Timmins for the architecture tour, we had invited Danny Whalen, who is the president of the Federation of Ontario Municipalities. And so he was also able to engage and participate with the architects and the engineers. They don't just want to hear from foresters, but they want to hear from community leaders. So it's really been a positive engagement, and look forward to continue the discussion.
Any other questions?
I'll stay away from the greenest industry in the world, the forest industry. And the lithium, though, you talked about Trevor, you have the second largest deposit of lithium in North America. I'm wondering, where is the largest deposit? And I know mining takes some time. How long is it going to take you to develop that? Are you going to be able to meet the demand that's needed before some of the other lithium deposits around the world are meeting that demand?
Great question. There's actually a couple in Quebec of some larger size than the deposit on our project here in Northwestern Ontario. Lithium, the Chinese market really accelerated, and the Australians in particular moved very quickly to develop resources to feed Chinese chemical plants. And as well, in particular, there's been two in Quebec that tried to move very quickly on getting into production recently. And it's really been difficult for them. typical industry, the OEMs or the manufacturers think that you can just turn on the taps and get supply. That's never the case. We know that as Northerners. Resource development takes time, and so we've seen the Australians struggle. We've seen struggle in Quebec, and a lot of wasted capital and resources. We at Frontier Lithium, it's kind of like driving behind the transport down the highway. Never like to be right behind the transport. Like to be a couple of vehicles back. And the reality is our high quality resources here, they're not going to disappear overnight. So being patient, doing things the right way is of utmost importance for us. Absolutely, I don't think we're going to be the first to market, but we hope to be second or third to market. Our opinion, so where we're at right now is in the initial permitting stage to start a demonstration concentrator, a very small plant up at the project. We're working on that now. Our expectations, our hope is 2021 to build and get that started. So, we've made sure that, again, decision makers of the North, and we're taking our time to make sure things are done right on the entire spectrum, because one thing is of utmost importance, and that's quality. And that's what we have in the North. So let's make sure we do this right and don't have a false start. So we think we'll be in time to be the second or third behind that transport. The market's, it's an evolution, it's not a revolution. We think 2025 is the time where we need to be ready. So,
Okay. There's some hand.
Just want to say great presentations. Thank you all three. Just a couple of comments on Christine's presentation, just to supplement. I think what immediately comes to mind with a lot of people is fire safety with wooden buildings. And there has been extensive and really excellent research carried out in that respect. And wooden buildings, engineered wood buildings, are very safe. And the codes and standards have been well informed by research from my organization, FP Innovations, and also in partnership with the National Research Council. I just wanted to put that in there. And I know you had only so much time. It's just something I wanted to add. The other thing I think is this really incredible potential with wooden and engineered wood bridges, returning to that in Canada and across the world. It's already happening, and we're seeing some great, I don't know what you call them, pilot projects, but in some places it's been going on for a long time. And they have a better life cycle, better performance, and much more carbon friendly than other materials. So engineered wood bridges and wooden bridges have real potential to come back. So that's all I want to say.
I'm really very sorry. We're in a bit of a battle of materials, and I don't want to throw shade, but since we're very climate change friendly here, steel and concrete, 13% of the world's global carbon emissions, if you're a country at that level. So I'm sorry I had to do it. I resisted until the end. I'm sorry.
So now I'm curious, how many bridges did you say are in the area of Kenora there, Dave? I've heard you give that speech several times. See, affordable low carbon bridges. There you go for Kenora. That's your campaign for the next time you decide to run for mayor again. In any event, at this note, it's 2:40. We're going to take a 20-minute body break, give you a chance to get up, walk around, refresh your coffee. We're going to reconvene at 3 o'clock promptly. There will be a warning ticking down for 5 minutes. And join me in thanking the panel once more time for